Meet Hudson Kimberly, a man in his early 40s with a quiet strength about him. Picture him standing on the porch of his little bungalow on Maple Street, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, sipping coffee as the morning sun filters through the trees. For years, Hudson scraped and saved every penny from his steady job, dreaming of this moment, owning a home of his own. And oh, how he loved the quiet here, the way the birds sang every dawn, a sweet reward for a man who'd earned his peace the hard way. This wasn't just a house to Hudson, it was a victory, a testament to his grit. 3 months into life on Maple Street, things started looking up even more. Hudson landed a promotion at work, a well-deserved bump that finally let him afford something special, a brand new black SUV. With the delivery just a week away, he got to work building a garage for it. Nothing extravagant, just a sturdy, modern space to park his prize. Hammer in hand, he poured his pride into every nail. But across the street, someone wasn't so thrilled. Sarah Coe, his neighbor in her mid-30s, watched from her window, her oversized homeware hanging loose as her face twisted into a scowl. She didn't like this one bit. Why should Hudson get to upgrade his life like that? Sarah's bitterness didn't stay quiet for long. Soon, whispers started creeping through the neighborhood. Hudson caught wind of it one day at his mailbox. A neighbor muttered, "Sarah's telling folks you're stealing from your boss to pay for that garage." Hudson just shook his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Let her talk, he thought, brushing it off like dust on his jeans. He wasn't about to let her sour his moment. Days later, his black SUV rolled into the driveway, sleek and shining under the afternoon sun. Hudson stepped out, running a hand over the hood, his chest swelling with pride. This was his, hard-earned and honest. But trouble was already brewing, and it was about to pull up right to his door. Hudson barely had time to admire his new black SUV before trouble came stomping across the street. Enter Sarah Coe, mid-30s, overweight, her oversized homeware flapping like a flag of fury as she charged toward his driveway. Her face was a mask of envy, eyes wild and cheeks flushed red, like she'd been stewing in resentment all day. She didn't knock, didn't wave, just barged right up and barked, "You can't have a new car like that." Hudson turned, leaning casually against his SUV, his broad frame steady as a rock. But Sarah? She was a storm ready to break, and she wasn't about to let this go quietly. Hudson kept his cool, his voice low and even. "Sarah," he said, "this is my money. I've saved for months to buy it." Simple truth, nothing more. But Sarah wasn't having it. She jabbed a trembling finger at him, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Borrowed it or stole it from your boss, huh? People like you don't just get luxury cars?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and venomous. Hudson's jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, but he held firm. "Believe what you want," he shot back, turning away like she wasn't worth the fight. Sarah's jealousy was boiling over now, and words weren't going to be enough for her. That's when Sarah's rage hit a new level. Her face twisted into something ugly and she spat. "I'm calling the police. You don't deserve this." Before Hudson could blink, she yanked her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, her voice morphing into a fake, trembling panic. "Officer, someone stole a car in my neighborhood. He's threatening to kill me because I won't help him lie about it. Hurry. I don't want to die." Hudson's mouth dropped open, disbelief washing over him. In his head, it clicked. For weeks, this woman's been spreading lies about me, poisoning the neighborhood with her envy. Now she's showing her true colors. He stood there stunned as Sarah smirked, thinking she'd won. But she'd just lit a fuse she couldn't put out. The afternoon sun hung low over Maple Street when the patrol car rolled up, its engine growling to a stop in Hudson Kimberly's driveway. 3 officers stepped out, each one a picture of authority in their crisp uniforms. Officer Daniels, early 40s with a stern jaw and piercing eyes. Officer Lopez, a steady woman with a calming presence. And Officer Reed, older and gruff, his face lined with years of seeing it all. The air buzzed with tension as neighbors clustered on lawns and porches, their whispers a low hum under the flashing red and blue lights. Hudson stood by his black SUV, arms crossed, his shirt and jeans still carrying the dust of a day's honest work. He was calm, almost too calm, like a man who knew the storm was coming but had already braced himself for it. Before the officers could even get their bearings, Sarah Coe came barreling toward them, a whirlwind of chaos in her oversized homeware. Her face was streaked with tears. Fake ones, Hudson figured, though she sold it like a pro. "That's him!" she wailed, jabbing a shaky finger at Hudson, her voice cracking with manufactured terror. "He stole that car from his boss and threatened to kill me because I wouldn't help him lie about it." The crowd gasped, heads turning, eyes darting between the gleaming SUV and the man beside it. Sarah clutched her chest, staggering toward Officer Lopez as if she might collapse. "He's dangerous. Please, you've got to do something." Hudson's brow furrowed, his mouth twitching with disbelief. This wasn't just envy anymore, it was a full-blown performance, and Sarah was playing it to the hilt. Officer Daniels stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel as he fixed Hudson with a steady gaze. "Mr. Kimberly," he said, voice flat but firm, "we've got a report you threatened your neighbor over a stolen car. What's your side?" Hudson didn't flinch. "That's a lie," he replied, his tone even, almost bored. "I bought that SUV with my own money. Check my bank records if you want proof." He nodded toward the vehicle, its sleek lines glinting in the fading light. "She's been jealous since I built my garage, spreading stories about me for weeks." The officers exchanged glances, Daniels skeptical, Lopez thoughtful, Reed rubbing his chin like he'd heard one too many tall tales. But Sarah wasn't done. She lunged forward, her voice a piercing shriek. "He's lying! He threatened to kill me! Save me, please! I don't want to die!" Officer Lopez put a hand on Sarah's shoulder, murmuring, "We're here now, ma'am." But her eyes flicked to Hudson, searching for cracks. That's when Hudson tilted his head toward his house. "You want the truth?" he said, cool as ever. "Check my security camera. It's been recording all day." The words landed like a pebble in a still pond, rippling through the scene. Daniels raised an eyebrow, Reed let out a low grunt, and Sarah's sobs hitched for just a split second, long enough for Hudson to notice. The officers didn't waste time. Lopez stayed with Sarah, who was still clutching at her like a lifeline, while Daniels and Reed followed Hudson to his porch. Inside, he pulled up the footage on a small laptop, the screen flickering to life with damning clarity. There it was. Sarah storming across the street that afternoon, her finger jabbing, her voice a banshee wail. "You stole it. You don't deserve it." The officers leaned in, their faces hardening as the truth unfolded frame by frame. Daniel straightened up, his notepad flipping open as he scribbled something down. "So," he said, voice clipped, "she came to you first, yelling about the car." Reed snorted, a dry chuckle escaping him. "And then calls us saying you threatened her? That's a hell of a twist." Hudson nodded, arms still crossed. "She's been at it for weeks. Ask the neighbors. They'll tell you." Sarah, hovering near the doorway with Lopez, caught wind of it and exploded. "He edited that!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she stumbled forward, pointing wildly at the screen. "He's a liar! A thief! You can't believe him!" But the officers weren't buying it. Lopez tilted her head, her calm fraying. "Ma'am, this is his property. You're on camera starting this. How's he editing that?" Sarah's mouth flapped open and shut, a fish gasping for water, but nothing came out. That's when the neighbors started trickling closer, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Carter, a wiry woman with gray curls, piped up from the edge of the yard. "She told me last week he was stealing from his boss. Said that garage proved it." Old Mr. Jenkins shuffled forward, his cane tapping the ground. "Cornered me too. Ranted about his promotion being fake. I told her it didn't add up." The officers turned, their eyes narrowing as the chorus of voices built. Sarah's face drained of color, her hands balling into fists. "They're lying too!" she snapped, but her voice was thinner now, desperation creeping in. Daniels folded his arms, staring her down. You've been using his driveway like a stage, accusing him of crimes, and now you're saying everyone's lying but you? Reed smirked, shaking his head. Lady, you're digging a hole we can't pull you out of. Hudson stood back, watching it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction settling in. Sarah thought she'd bury him, but she'd just handed him the shovel. The air on Maple Street thickened as Sarah Coe's facade shattered under the weight of her own lies. Officer Daniels had just called her bluff, his voice cutting through her frantic denials like a blade, and the neighbors' testimonies had boxed her in. She stood there trembling in her oversized homeware, her face a twisted mess of fury and panic. Then something snapped. With a guttural scream, she lunged at Hudson, her hands clawing the air, aiming for his throat. You think you're better than me? She roared, her voice raw and unhinged. Hudson stepped back, his eyes wide but his stance steady, a man unshaken by the chaos she'd become. Before she could reach him, Officer Reed moved like lightning, his weathered hands grabbing her wrists and twisting them behind her back with a practiced ease. That's enough, he barked, his tone a gravelly thunderclap that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Sarah thrashed like a trapped animal, her feet kicking wildly, sending a spray of dirt across the driveway. Let me go, she screeched, her hair falling into her face, matted with sweat. Then, in a moment that froze everyone, she reared her head back and spat, a wet, ugly glob that landed square on Officer Daniels' cheek. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath as time seemed to halt. Daniels wiped his face slowly, his jaw clenching so tight you could hear it, his calm replaced by a cold, steely resolve. Lopez, still by Sarah's side, shook her head in disgust, her voice low. You just made this so much worse. Sarah's eyes darted around, wild and desperate, but there was no sympathy left. Not from the officers, not from the neighbors, not even from the late afternoon shadows stretching across the street. She'd crossed a line, and the ground beneath her was crumbling fast. Daniels pulled his cuffs from his belt, the metal glinting as he snapped them onto Sarah's wrists. Sarah Coe, he said, his voice a formal growl. You're under arrest for assaulting an officer, filing a false report, and defamation. We'll sort the rest at the station. She bucked against the restraints, her screams piercing the air. I'm the victim here. You can't do this. He's the thief. But her words fell flat, drowned by the click of the patrol car door as Reed shoved her inside. She pounded on the window, her face pressed against the glass, a distorted mask of rage and disbelief. Neighbors pulled out phones filming the spectacle, some with wide eyes, others with grim nods. Mrs. Carter muttered to Mr. Jenkins, She always had a mouth on her, but this? Jenkins just sighed, leaning on his cane. Brought it on herself. As the car pulled away, its sirens fading into the distance, Hudson stood on his porch, the black SUV still parked proudly behind him. Officer Lopez lingered a moment, dusting off her hands. You're a patient man, Mr. Kimberly, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Most folks would have lost it. Hudson shrugged, his voice quiet but firm. Didn't need to. She did that for me. Lopez chuckled, tipping her head in a silent salute before joining her partners. The crowd dispersed slowly, some casting apologetic glances Hudson's way, others still buzzing with the shock of it all. By nightfall, the street was quiet again, but the echo of Sarah's meltdown lingered like a stain no one could scrub away. She'd wanted to ruin him, but all she'd done was shine a spotlight on her own wreckage. The next morning, Hudson's name was cleared in a courtroom as swift as it was decisive. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, reviewed the camera footage and neighbor accounts, her gavel falling with a thud that marked Sarah's fate. She was arraigned, defamation, false reporting, assault, and the whispers said jail time was just the start. Back on Maple Street, Hudson returned to his bungalow, the early light catching the dew on his garage roof. He stepped out to his driveway, coffee in hand, the birds singing their familiar tune. That evening, neighbors trickled over, some with casseroles, others with quiet words. Mrs. Carter teared up, clutching his arm. "We should have stopped her sooner," she said. Mr. Jenkins clapped his shoulder, gruff but warm. "You're a good man, Hudson." The living room filled with faces, some stunned, some cheering, all hanging on his every word as he recounted the ordeal. He leaned against his counter, the SUV visible through the window, and spoke softly. "She tried to break me, spread lies, called the law, all because she couldn't stand seeing me rise. But the truth came out, like it always does." A hush fell over the room, and then he added, "I've forgiven her, not because she deserves it, but because holding on to that poison would hurt me more than her." A few neighbors sniffled, others nodded, and one young kid in the back clapped, setting off a ripple of applause. Hudson smiled, a small, tired thing, and stepped onto his porch as the last guest left. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, and he took a deep breath, the quiet wrapping around him like an old friend. Sarah was gone, her house dark across the street, and Maple Street felt lighter for it. Justice had rolled in, steady and sure, and for Hudson, peace wasn't just a reward anymore, it was a promise he'd keep.